6 characters trapped in a 3D death puzzle trying to navigate through endless rooms rigged with insane death traps. In this video, we beat the 3D death puzzle in Cube 2021. Let's go. The film opens with a man waking up in a squared, high-tech looking room. He wears a strange overall reminding us of prisoners and seems to have no recollection of how he got here. He instinctively starts to explore the room and tries to figure out what is happening. The most obvious features of the room, apart of its jarring symmetry, are arguably the 6 latch doors on each side. There is one in the middle of each wall, and even on the floor and ceiling, given 6 options if one were to leave this place. He makes a random choice, opens the lock, enters the shaft, climbs through it, and once again finds himself in a room that looks just like the one he just left. But before he can figure out any of the clues hidden in this one, we hear a menacing mechanism being triggered and he is penetrated by a massive metal pillar, instantly killing him in the process. This is the first death and highlights the dangers we are dealing with. Any of the 6 rooms around us could be fitted with ingenious death traps that will kill us if we fail to make sure that the room we're about to enter is safe. We skip over to Yuichi waking up for the first time. There are 2 other characters in his room. One is Shinji and the other a child named Chiharu. Having a child in here is rather interesting because it complicates the reason why these characters have been chosen to be locked into the sick game. I'll explain more to that later. It is clear that none of them have any idea why they are here or how they ended up here. And being kidnapped always implies a reason for the kidnapping. Meaning there is a reason to all of this, and our best chance to survive would be to find out why. The best way to go about this is to look out for similarities between you and anybody else in here. Everyone has been chosen to be here, therefore there is a good chance that we have something in common. If we can find that commonality, we are one step closer in figuring out who is responsible for this, which in return could give us a hint at how to escape. Before any of that can be talked through though, one of the 6 doors is opened and a stern guy named Ide enters the room. He is injured, doesn't wear his shoes, and does not say a single word. He simply walks by, climbs up the wall, and opens the door at the ceiling. Upon opening it, the character who had been penetrated by the metal pillar before falls through, including his stamped out chest piece that I can't show you, but it basically looks like a squared piece of watermelon. At the same time, another door opens. This time, a woman named Kai enters. The group, at least for now, is complete. Before a meaningful conversation can take place in which valuable information can be shared, Shinji, triggered by the dead body crashing to the floor, starts to freak out. He storms to a random door and attempts to climb through it. Ide steps in to hold him back, eventually climbs through himself, and drops one of his shoes into the adjacent room. A mere second later, flamethrowers are activated, torching the shoe and possibly anything else that would have entered the room instead. This shows the 3 characters, and us of course, what we can expect from entering the wrong room. I'm saying the wrong room because there are likely safe rooms scattered throughout this place, because all the rooms in which all of these characters woke up in were safe by default. Now, assuming they were not teleported in here, someone must have brought them in, meaning there must be safe ways to navigate through these rooms and especially to get to an exit eventually. This is a very important observation to make. It is based on deductive logic and rationality, so most people could arrive at that conclusion themselves. But stress, especially in the eye of death, inhibits activity in brain parts responsible for rational thinking and thus makes it very difficult to think clearly. Think about the mind going blank whenever you experience fear or anxiety. It's the exact same thing. So if any one of them could make this observation and say it out loud, it would likely calm everyone else down and show that there must be a way out. Unfortunately, no such conversation takes place. We just see a bunch of clueless characters latching onto the only one who shows vigor, which is Ide. Now, there is nothing wrong with following the strongest in a group. In fact, it's arguably a biological necessity for survival. But somebody should have asked Ide what he knows. He clearly has been through multiple rooms already, indicated by the injuries covering his body. An assessment of this situation would bring everyone up to speed and reduce potential emotional meltdowns in the future. Sure, His strategy, to navigate through rooms by testing them out by dropping in shoes, seems to be pretty reliable. But what if we run out of objects to drop down? We only have 10 shoes available, 12 if we were smart enough to scavenge the dead guy before, and 6 overalls, assuming mere clothing would be enough to trigger the traps. Also, what if there are rooms fitted with different sensors other than pressure and motion sensors? And what makes anyone believe that a room with a death trap in is automatically the wrong room to pass through? In fact, when he dropped in the shoe that was then torched, we didn't figure out what activated the trap. If it was only a pressure sensor on the floor, we could have climbed up the walls, monkey swung us to the ceiling door, and gone through that. What I'm trying to say here is, if a room has a death trap in that can be avoided with the right strategy, would it still be the wrong room to pass through? These are all valid questions and important to be considered. Failing to do so could result in following a strategy that may allow us to avoid getting stamped through or torched, but it could fail to bring us to an exit, which means we would just starve. Our characters pass through multiple doors next. Everyone is calm and quiet. They just follow Ide, hoping the next room holds the key for an escape. They come through a room in which Yuichi finds a button on the floor that he uses to mark the wall with. A very important thing to do once you consider that we must find a way out of a 3-dimensional labyrinth. The last thing you want is to go in circles, so marking walls is essential, especially if you consider that drawing a map of this place at some point would be helpful, which it arguably is. After he picked up the button and joined Ide for the next shoe drop session, we finally seem to make some progress. Even though the room they have just tested was rigged with a death trap and prompts them to turn around, Yuichi spots a 9-digit number in the shaft connecting the rooms. He finds it interesting, but not interesting enough to share it with the others, at least until they make it into another adjacent room and he spots another 9-digit number in that shaft. Now this number must mean something. This maze was built with a purpose. Having those numbers right there in between 2 rooms seems oddly specific for it to just be random. This assumption is further backed by the fact that there are 2 9-digit numbers on each respective side of a shaft, seemingly hinting at something in the rooms behind them. Now, algorithms have never been my strength, to be honest, but the fact that they seem to navigate through square rooms, I would, from here on out, test out all 6 rooms around me and note down the numbers of each room. The more data we have, the better. And with the button Yuichi picked up before, we can even use the walls and floor as makeshift whiteboards to visualize our findings. Another fantastic thing to consider is that there seems to be no time limits on how long one can rest in a safe room. Even though we only have 3 to 4 days to complete whatever this is, because otherwise we'll just starve, we are able to contemplate and even take a nap in peace whenever we want. That's a pretty epic silver lining to be mindful of, if you ask me. Now Yuichi opens the next door and finds another character sitting in there. This is Mr. Ando, an elderly businessman excited to see that people came to save him. Not quite, but hey, we can't blame him for thinking positively. Mr. Ando is quick to point out the most obvious strange fact: the kid. He believes that there must be a reason why he himself is in here, and thus everyone else. And since this is a hostile place, it would make sense that whoever put us in here wants to punish us. But why would you want to punish a mere child in such a cruel way? Even if that child wronged you, it's still just a kid. This would almost certainly point into another direction, namely not that these characters have been brought in here for punishment, but for an experiment, and that each of them holds one valuable skill necessary for an escape. It's impossible to know for sure, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to discuss everything mentioned so far and consider all possibilities, especially since there seems to be no rush at all. Or is there? A bit earlier, our characters have witnessed this. Now, I don't know about y'all, but this sounds an awful lot like the shifting stairs in Hogwarts. If that assumption is correct, it could mean that this maze shifts itself. A fact that is further backed later in the movie when our characters once again come across this specific and lasting commotion. We'll come back to this eventually, but first let us see what Yuichi and Chiharu figure out in regards to the 9-digit numbers. After our characters make it to another chamber, they realize that choosing rooms only based on absent reactions after dropping in a shoe is just not enough. It takes about 5 seconds in this room until the lights go out and a death trap is activated. Spinning blade fans, let's go. They're slowly closing in on our characters, leaving the only way to escape the floor ledge beneath, leading to the room below. Now, everyone makes it through alive, barely but successfully. Now, this stressful situation leads to an altercation between Ide and Yuichi, with the former accusing him of having almost killed the whole group because he was frozen in fear and thus held up the escape route. Now, that's fair criticism, but to be frozen in terror after witnessing giant blades closing in on you, ready to chop you down like a cartoon character, is kind of understandable as well. This quickly leads to Mr. Ando taking the same route, calling out Ide on his BS, saying that he knows more than he admits since he had been progressing through this maze long before meeting them. This is another good example how non-communication leads to skepticism, which in return leads to a dysfunctional group that will eventually fragment and decay. However, with all of them presumably having one common goal, getting out of here alive, I think sticking together and building trust is an essential step in beating this labyrinth. After everyone has calmed down, Chihiro asks Yuichi if he remembers the digits of the first shaft. He surprisingly does and recites the numbers in their exact order. They quickly arrive at the conclusion that prime numbers have something to do with a room being a death trap or safe. Namely that if any of the 3 3-digit numbers are prime numbers, the room connected to it should be a death trap, and if there are no prime numbers, the room should be safe. This is of course just a theory that needs to be proven first. After Mr. Ando makes a judgmental remark about why they are now listening to a kid, Yuichi is triggered and decides to blindly trust Chihiro's idea and jumps into an adjacent room that should be safe. Luckily, Chihiro's idea is correct. So, depending on the numbers imprinted on the shafts, we are able to figure out which rooms are safe versus which not. This is a huge step forward as it allows us not to be killed. What this newly found prime number based strategy brings is the fact that now we can go through more rooms and gather more data, which is arguably always a good thing. It's also important to mention that Yuichi had a flashback before Ando's remark about Chihiro. We saw a flashback of his younger brother who seemed to have been severely abused by his father. We have yet to find out what this means, but it's obvious that he had a traumatizing past, which may be connected to the reason of him being here. The group then makes it through many more rooms, proving more and more that this prime number strategy works pretty well, until it doesn't anymore. They get to a room in which all rooms around them are attached to prime numbers, and the room from where they came is now locked. Not only that, while inspecting the numbers in each shaft a second time, Mr. Ando loses control and starts yelling at Yuichi from behind. This, to our big surprise, triggers a trap inside this room that would slice anybody into multiple pieces. What this tells us is there are rooms with different sensors other than just motion and pressure sensors, as this room right here has an acoustic sensor working for it. Based on this, they figure out that if they are quiet enough, they can make it through this room and continue with their increasingly pointless search for an exit. Pointless because if all 6 rooms are possible options to take, then which is the right one? If just one ledge in each room is the right one, then what are the chances that we will pick the right door every time? Well, I asked AI to help me out, so here is that conversation. If there is 6 doors behind which are 6 more rooms, and only one door leads to the right room, after which the right door has to be chosen again to find the answer, what's the chance of picking the right door in the second room after having picked the right door in the first room? The answer was, assuming that each door has an equal chance of being chosen and that the correct door is chosen randomly in each stage,
the probability of picking the right door in the first room is 1 in 6. Once the right door has been chosen in the first room, there are now 6 doors again in the second room, but only one of them leads to the correct room. Therefore, the probability of picking the right door in the second room is also 1 in 6. The probability of both events happening together, picking the right door in both the first and second rooms, is the product of the individual probabilities, which is 1 in 6 times 1 in 6, which means 1 in 36.
So the chance of picking the right door in the second room after having picked the right door in the first room is 1 in 36, or approximately 2.8% chance. Well, thank you very much, ChatGPT. Appreciate that. Now, what does it actually mean? Well, our characters so far have picked at least 20 rooms. The chance that they have picked the right path so far is very low. In fact, it is that low. Yep, based on this, even though just based on a worst case scenario, means that unless we have a plan, we are screwed. Luckily, a plan isn't that far away. Our characters make it quietly over to the next room. Shinji, the second last to go, screws things up though, as he drops his pair of shoes, activating the trap. Mr. Ondo, only with a lot of luck, can survive the trap, as he is quickly pulled into the shaft, escaping the razor-sharp strings sweeping through. This does not sit well with him, and he calls out Shinji, which I guess is a fair reaction. The only problem? Well, Shinji seems to be very insecure. So insecure that any negative remark about any of his actions is taken personal, and he slowly develops resentment. While he is becoming increasingly emotional, our other characters find something very interesting on the wall. Something resembling a map. It's a squared cube with equal lengths of 25 inside another cube with lengths of 27. This is definitely important to ponder about if we had time. Unfortunately, Shinji's severe emotional reaction triggers another death trap, but this time in this room, which highlights two new important things. First, even emotions can trigger death traps, possibly through body signs such as sweating, dilated pupils, and other cues. And second, even presumed safe rooms could be fitted with death traps, meaning in actuality there is not a single room in this labyrinth that isn't a death trap. Meaning the numbers they found may actually have a different purpose. Now, being so distracted with the cube map on the wall, our characters don't notice the relationship between the triggered death trap and Shinji's emotions. All they can do now is escape in time and find themselves yet again in another room. They discuss the purpose of the map they found, but can't quite figure out the meaning yet. All they can do is move forward. The moment Shinji opens the next latch, he screams in fear and jumps back. The dead body of the guy that fell through into their room at the beginning is right there, implying that they must have gone in circles. This leads to big frustrations in almost all members. But Yuichi is quick to point out that something does not add up here, to which Kai responds that he's right. She continues with saying that they have been taking more routes through floor latches than ceiling latches, which would indicate that they must be on another level compared to from where they started. The body being here though implies that they have never changed the floor. Since we remember that shifting commotion at the beginning of this film, we already know where this is going. But while they are discussing the strangeness of this discovery, the lights start to flicker and the same shifting sound can be heard again. This leads to them concluding that the rooms must be able to shift and change positions. Now, if this cube has shifting chambers in it and they move deterministically at set time intervals, we now have an even greater amount of data available to make the right moves. It's already been established that getting out of here without a plan is practically impossible. So with this, even though at first a scary discovery, we may actually be able to draw a map of this place, helping us to get out. But where would we start? Well, first, to avoid the scary side of this dead body in front of us, our characters decide to move along. As they get into the new chamber, Chiharu decides to once again study the numerals. He seems to have something in his mind, but before he can say anything, the room starts shifting again, leading to a tremor that causes him to fall into the adjacent room. Yuichi rushes for help as a death trap is activated. Red lasers scanning the room for any intruders sweep through. They pinpoint Chiharu's position and, with a time gap of multiple seconds, 2 laser beams shoot down. However, Yuichi could already push him out of target. Ide jumps in too now, trying to help. Now clearly those lasers aren't as deadly as any of the traps before. Our characters literally escape death 4 times back to back. As Chiharu can be brought into safety, and Yuichi too, Ide is the last one to follow. But somehow he can't make it a 5th time and is wiped out on the spot. I don't think I need to elaborate on how you could have survived this. I mean, simply not turning your back to the lasers and instead anticipating the shots would have sufficed in ducking the beams and escaping through the shaft in time. The group, now visibly disturbed by this event, is in need of a pause, which makes sense if we remember how Ide was the quasi-leader of the group. Take away the leader and you take away the heart. Luckily, we still got Yuichi and Chiharu, who seem to have pretty good ideas on how to navigate through this 3-dimensional death maze. Now Yuichi starts frantically scribbling on the floor until the kid joins in. After a moment of silence, he says, "Cartesian coordinates. The numerals are Cartesian coordinates." This revelation is worth everything. You see, Cartesian coordinates are a way of locating 2 points in a 2 or 3-dimensional space. In 2 dimensions, we use x and y, and in 3 dimensions, we add the z for depth. Since each of the 3-digit numbers, which we now know are the values of x, y, and z, can never be higher than 999, the highest prime factorization of the highest value of any given coordinate in this cube is 37. 999 divided by 37 is 27. What does this mean? I have no clue, but it seems to somehow be related. So I suppose there must be a rational equation or theory to this. If you are the genius we all need right now, feel free to drop a comment, I'll pin it. For all others who just want to enjoy the show, well, Yuichi checks out the number of a shaft nearby, concludes that the value of the y-coordinate is 24 by adding up all 3 numbers in it, and figures out that if they keep going this way, they should get to the edge of the cube. In the next room, Mr. Ando approaches Yuichi yet again and starts rambling on how all of this is punishment and how he himself deserves of being in here. He continues with saying that he had deceived multiple people and only ever acted in self-interest. Interestingly enough, just as he stops talking, the room activates metal bars that shoot up from the ground, splitting up our characters into 2 groups. This is strange because the truth of this place is slowly starting to be revealed. Before, a death trap was triggered based on Shinji's emotions or conscious state. Now, a similar thing happened with Mr. Ando. Shinji and Ando seem to be mentally defeated, much different than Chiharu and Yuichi, who still actively fight for survival. Meaning this cube may be controlled, at least in part, by your consciousness. This theory is further backed up by the next scene. As Yuichi and his group try to get to the y-coordinate 999, they come across a room that projects a memory of Yuichi onto the wall. As we know, he had suffered from flashbacks throughout this film, so we know he is perpetually tormented with those memories. Now, as Ide is dead and the other 2 quasi-friends have left, it may have resulted in guilt feelings once again bubbling up within him. This could have led the cube causing this projection where we finally find out what happened to him. Being abused by his father, his brother couldn't take it anymore and decided that unaliving himself would be preferable. Yuichi had the chance to prevent the disaster but failed as he picked the worst possible words with his brother flirting with death. He said, "Just tough it out, man." Yeah, that's probably not something you want to tell someone on the edge of a high-rise building with known depression, but you know, it's no wonder he struggles with PTSD. I mean, who wouldn't? The guilt feelings this man must endure must be crazy. That's also possibly the reason why he treats Chiharu with so much respect and trust. He tries to make up for his past mistakes by making the right decisions in the present. Meanwhile, we get a glimpse at people who are the exact opposite and lack remorse or any sort of healthy self-awareness. Mr. Ando and Shinji, the worst match since oil met water for the first time, don't get along very well. It only takes about 2 scenes until Shinji decides to take out Mr. Ando by utilizing one of the sliding doors in a more or less creative way. Back with the other 3 characters, deafening silence is prevailing. Chiharu tries his best to confront Yuichi about his past mistake concerning his brother, but he, wounded by this soul-eating trauma, can't give any appropriate answer. Now, I don't know if the following scene is purposely made to be ingenious or if this was just a natural flow of the scriptwriter's penmanship, but what Chiharu does next is absolutely crazy. As Yuichi does not answer any of his questions, he, suffering from his own past, opens the latch on the floor and decides to jump into his death, just as Yuichi's brother has done in the past. In the last second, Yuichi reacts and grabs his hand before another tragic event could take place. This allows Yuichi to relive his traumatic experience and act out the way he always wished he had, thus closing the cycle and allowing him to finally heal. On the other hand, Chiharu, a neglected child that never got any affection from an adult, is saved unconditionally by an almost stranger, showing him that there are people out there that truly do care. thus enabling him to bond with another human being for the first time. Truly the best scene of this whole film. In addition to that, Kai opens a random latch through which air flows through, implying that their Cartesian theory was right. The trio continues and finds a window in the room behind. For the first time ever, they can glimpse at the structure they're stuck in from outside. It's a gigantic sort of dystopian structure reminiscent of the Matrix. It is clear that they are nowhere close to the bottom, but have proven that the numerals are indeed coordinates. The only problem? Well, the y coordinate of this room added up to be 26 and not 27. Meaning if they're at the edge already, then how is this not a y with the value of 999? Well, after looking out for a few moments, they witness a chamber moving around, displaying what had made the shifting commotion throughout their journey. It also proves why they haven't heard it in regular intervals, as you would likely not be able to hear it the further away you are from its location. It looks like an elevator. They conclude that the master coordinate 999 must be reserved for this particular room. And to their luck, Kai adds that she had actually seen a shaft with those exact coordinates not too long ago. So, they turn around and go back to that room, hoping to finally get out of here again. Unfortunately, on their way, they come across Shinji. He is covered in Unknown's blood and lies, saying that they have gotten into a trap and only he survived. Yuichi is quick to believe, but Chihiro is more skeptical, as he can see Shinji smiling disturbingly after he had revealed Unknown's death. Now, as they proceed into the adjacent room, Shinji reveals that this room was a prime number room, yet no death trap was activated, which proves his bad intentions. But it raises another question: why was no trap activated? Now before we get to that, a fight breaks out. As Chihiro and Yuichi try to abandon Shinji to escape into the final room, Yuichi is grabbed by Shinji and pulled backwards. Like every other villain, he goes on with a monologue of his origin story, saying that he was bullied, how no one ever helped him, and how middle schoolers annoy him to death in his position as a convenience store clerk. Now it's clear that his life is indeed miserable, because nobody should endure annoying 9-year-olds all day long. That's simply unjust. On a more serious note, it's clear that this guy has been suffering through life for a very long time already. So much that he gave up and gave away all control over his own life. Driven by emotions and impulses, he attacks Yuichi a last time and is almost able to kill him. At very last though, he is targeted by the death trap in his room and is wiped out himself. Now in a tragic series of semi-final scenes, we see how Chihiro and Yuichi desperately try to catch the elevator room next by that is already almost out of reach. At last, only the kid is able to slip through, leaving Yuichi to his fate and becoming yet another victim of this 3D death maze. Chihiro eventually makes it down to the ground floor, and then Kai finally speaks out, saying that whatever is out there waiting for you, things might not have changed since you came to the cube. To which he replies, I need to change. Now what do you think about this ending? To me, it signifies that there are things outside of our control, but with the right mindset and honesty towards ourselves, we can grow and become those that can beat the problems that life throws at us. A discovery Chihiro had successfully made inside this cube. As to Kai, it seems like she is part of the cube, perhaps even the sentient representation of it, trying to understand what makes human beings tick. I don't know, but I do know that you are freaking epic, my friends. I've worked my butt off for this video, so if you dropped a like, it would mean a lot to me. Thank you for watching, my friends. I see you next week, and take care. Binge another one.